Okay. Briefly, what I did yesterday, and I'm going to do that on this side too, is I started by gently shading in the face by using the side of my pencil. I'm using an HB pencil here, which is a really good shading pencil, especially this turquoise one that I think many of you have from your sketchbooks. For darker areas, you can also use 2B, 6B, but I'm using the side of my tip and very, very gently creating a gradient that shows the turning of the form. Okay, when you're drawing a portrait or any kind of three-dimensional object, even though your piece of paper is flat and your reference might be flat, you want to be keeping in mind the fact that this is a round three-dimensional form in real life. So the way that the light comes together at the bridge of the nose, the cheeks, the head is a reflection of the fact that the head is round, there's a skull underneath. So as you're working, you always want to be thinking about what the form is that you're trying to represent. Okay, so here I'm actually turning my pencil in different directions as I shade and imagining in my mind that I'm creating a forehead that is protruding in space. Okay, so when you shade, I'll zoom in a little bit here. It's going to look a bit grainy. I know it's hard to see completely on Zoom, but the way to mitigate that and soften it is you can use tools like we've used before, such as a tissue or a tortillon, where you very gently, without pressing too hard, can soften up those forms. So I'm going in the direction of the form, imagining that I'm actually creating this round head or round shape. Right. I always want to be thinking about what values I see in the image. So most of her face is in sort of this range, but as I get towards the shadow side, I am going to have these darker tones. The only place that I really, really see dark is in the corners of her mouth, her hair, her eyes. So you don't want to go too dark where you see shadows, and you also don't want to keep it too light because you're trying to capture a specific person or skin tone. However, as I begin the process, I always start a little bit lighter and more gently in order to, not make the paper too blotchy. It's better to start with very gradual layers. I can always make it darker, but it's going to be harder to make it lighter. Okay, so again, in this case, I'm going to go darker than I did when I did the other side. And I'm looking at how it sort of gradates on the skin from darker to lighter, from where the forehead meets the hair and into the face. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about the hair in a moment. But here, just like when you did the sphere drawings, and even with perspective, I'm using very, very small marks. Sometimes I do little circular rounded marks, sometimes just small hatch marks. It's really up to you, but I want to think about changing the direction of my marks, creating a soft gradation to capture the changes in the light. Here I'm going to change the direction of my pencil. And then in a few moments, I'm going to sort of blend it together very gently using the tissue. And then when I get to details like the eyes and so forth, I'll probably use the tortillon, which is your blending stump. Okay, so here, if I want to create the form of the head and make it less grainy, then I'll very gently go in and soften it out, making sure that the part of the tissue that I'm using is clean. Okay, and you can always take a kneaded eraser and pull highlights back out if you end up going over it or it's too dark or whatnot. But I'm really being very gentle with my pressure and the way I'm applying it. Okay, so there's that part. In order to really understand value in a work of art, it's important to get the major values down, such as the darkness of the hair or even the eyes, to be able to see everything else. With hair, one of the key things to making it look nice and realistic is actually grouping it into large masses of tone or value. So here it's very dark, but there's a little bit of highlight popping out that I can create either with the eraser or by layering. But I also want to think about what the texture is of her hair. So as I go in and fill it, even though I'm doing a relatively flat tone, her hair is a little bit curly, and it has a very particular texture. So I'm going to try to capture that texture as well with the pencil. So here I'm going in, and the silhouette of the hair is very important. So there's this soft edge that I'm going to try to portray too. But this is going to help me to visualize if the forehead is the right tone and other things in the picture are the right tone. Okay, so I'm going in a circular manner, and then I'm going to change it to being a little bit more wavy when I get to these parts here. And if I want to leave a little bit of light where there's highlights, I can. And then I can also go back. So I'm doing this very quickly. I want you to take your time, but this pencil's not that dark. So I can take my 2B and go back in and add much darker tones later. So I would suggest with hair that you focus on what you're most, the tone that you see the most, and then you can use the eraser or a darker pencil to go back and add darks and lights. Very curly hair is going to be the most challenging. It's going to take a bit more time. And if you want to talk to me about strategies for creating curly hair, you can definitely do that. Okay. So I'll probably go back. I'll definitely go back and work on that more. I want to show you the eyes and a little bit with the nose and the mouth. And I know many of you are not at this point yet. You're still doing your line drawing, but I do want you to try to work independently, because since we don't get to work together that much, so I wanted to at least give you some direction as to how you would approach the shading. So here, it's up to you what order you want to go in, if you want to do the head or the eyes, but you want to think about layering very gradually, no matter what. So I'm putting in her eyebrow, but I could wait to do that later. I think it can sometimes help with getting the tones around it. And I'm just blocking it in. I can always go back and add a little more detail. All right. So with the eye, I am also thinking about the whole structure of the top of her eye, how the light is hitting it, the fact that it protrudes in space, and there's also a socket. So as you're doing that, you want to think about how the shadows in the drawing can help to represent the actual three-dimensional depth of the eye itself. And again, I'm thinking this is a rounded form. It's going into the head. I don't want heavy lines on the nose. It's much more soft. Even though I had some shading in there from yesterday, I want to go back over it again. And here, try to capture that value. Okay, even though the lids seem to have lines, there's the lid here. You want to think of it as just being a shadow. It's not a hard, heavy line. Everything is much more subtle than that. So I'm going to go in and softly indicate this dark line, but I'm not going to make it 100%, darkness. I want to make it a little bit lighter than that. I can always go darker, and I'm keeping it really kind of blurry and soft. I'll zoom in more here so you can see, and it's a little hard to see my reference, but I'll maybe throw this over like that. Okay. And I'm looking very, very carefully, even though my reference image is a little bit blurry. It's okay sometimes if it's not super crisp, but it is easier to capture the detail when you can really see the image. So sometimes when you're photographing someone, you can take an image with a flash that can sometimes show details that get lost in the shadows. And you can also look at a colored version to see where the separation between things like, the red inside the eye, over here, the tear duct, and so forth. Okay, so I'm just really taking my time. You want to make sure your pencil is super sharp. That's going to make a big difference. Here I can see it gets a little bit flatter. It's also not all white in here. It has some gray because there's a shadow being cast from the lid onto the eyeball, and the lid itself is in shadow, and there's a little bit of a highlight in there, but I want to make sure I get all those values right. And then the iris, the colored part of the eye, also has kind of a blurry edge. Even though it is a very dark circle, I want to make sure I get that blurry edge in there. And then the pupil is right in the center. So for this, I might use a 2B to make it darker. And I'm going to shade it in, but I'm going to make it a little lighter than what I see in the photo, because I know that there's more of a reflection on there than what I can see. Okay, so I'm really thinking about value, I'm thinking about form, which is the three-dimensionality of the eye. And then in a minute, I'm going to start to soften it with some of my different tools, the tissue and the tortillon. Okay, and I'm going darker at the edge. And you want to be careful not to overemphasize the bags under the eyes, but you also want to have enough so that it looks like the person is the age that they're at. So there's, a lot to think about. You can always make things darker. Okay. And here, because it's a rounded cheek, again, I'm going to change the direction of the form of my pencil to make sure that I'm capturing that roundness. And you can also go, as I said, in a more circular motion as you start to get into little details. Like here at the bottom of the nose, I want to capture that plane underneath the nose, which shows that the nose is popping out into space. I also have, there's that highlight here that I erased out. And very, very small marks. Okay, and I'm cross-hatching a little bit as I work my way around. Okay, and then I would keep doing this for a while, but before I use the tissue, but I do want to show you how I can smooth that out because inevitably it is going to look a little bit rough because of this material. So I'm very gently, again, going in with my tissue and going over the surface, thinking about using the tissue as a tool. It's not just smudging, it's actually using it as a tool to create form. Okay, and the tortillon tool, go in with this tool and get details. So this is what I would use for the details on the eye if I'm shading in the eye. Okay, and if it does get too dark at a certain spot, you can always go and take the kneaded eraser and kind of pull that darkness back out again. Okay, and I would definitely work on this a lot more. I do want to show you how to do the lips and a little bit more with the nose, but I'm being, again, very gentle and soft. I definitely need to do more on the nostril here. Okay, so for the underside of the nostril where it's dark, you just want to think of it as a shadow and not necessarily being like a dark hole the way you might have if you were drawing a portrait as a child. And again, you want to think of the underside of the nose is a plane that's going back in space. So that's going to be darker than the sides that are being hit by light. And I'm not doing a heavy line here. I'm thinking of it as a shadow. Okay, and try not to use your fingers to blend. You might be compelled to do that. It's a little bit better to use the tissue. Okay, so here I have the lips, and these lips have a really nice range of value that I can work from. And I'm thinking about, what is it that I'm drawing? I'm not just copying shapes on a photograph, but these are lips that wrap around the face. They have depth, they have light and shadow. So to kind of tune into the anatomy that you're looking at, whatever it is. And each person is going to be different, but there's also similarities between things. Usually the top and the bottom lip are about the same proportion. Okay, and the lips it's not just a sharp line that meets the face. It blends more softly into the face. So you want to be careful not to have a super heavy outline or for the outside or the middle line. This is a shadow being cast from the top lip onto the bottom or the bottom lip onto the face, whatever the lighting situation is in your setup. So here I'm starting to shade that in, and I can always layer more and more as I go. I'm just trying to get some kind of tone down to start and then thinking about how it blends into the face. Okay, so I'm going to stop there for now. There's Obviously, a lot more than I could do. I'm going to continue to analyze, the difference between like the chin and the neck. What are those values? How can I use tone to separate that? Whatever the background tone is also going to give you some perspective on the values in the face. If it's lighter, darker, I would suggest at the end doing some kind of gradation just to show that there's atmosphere in the space, but you don't have to do any kind of detailed background. Even clothing can be simplified. There's also going to be a soft shadow underneath the clothing that being cast on the body. So there's all kinds of things that you're going to look at and evaluate. But the main thing is that you work slowly, keep your pencil sharp. Um, think about creating the three-dimensional form by using the pencil in different directions and continuing to just use your observation skills to see what is in your image and how you can translate that as best as you can. I know for some of you, this is very challenging. You haven't done it before. Obviously, I have many years of experience drawing portraits, but I want you to try your best. It takes a lot of practice to get good at this, but every single step is going to lead you in the right direction. Okay.